Well, I think I just evolved into rural healthcare. My father was a country doc, my mother a nurse practitioner, and I'm the second oldest of 12 kids. And between the whole family, there's like 14 of us docs. Most of us are rural. And we also had a farm. So I grew up with horses, cows, and a garden. I also am the second oldest of 12 children. And my mother worked in the office every day, dad at the hospital and that. So I grew up with rural medicine. And by the time I was 12, I mean, I could work in the garden, work on the farm, work in the office. I helped with the delivery of a baby. I knew how to take care of babies, knew how to cook. A lot of these life skills I had growing up. And I think sometimes I might have felt a little hard put as a child. I did work hard, but I learned how to work hard, and that was a valuable lesson. And my life skills were valuable lessons as I went ahead in life and taught me to be quite independent, but quite capable around the home and in a medical practice. I also did house calls to some tar paper shacks when I was barely 10, 12 years old. So I just grew up, and then I went away to McGill, to Montreal, the big city. It was an adventure. It was wonderful. I got into DNA research, and I thought that was fascinating. It was growing at the time. I traveled all over North America. I traveled in Europe. I published some papers, and I did a bunch of research. And then after 7 years, I began to realize that maybe this wouldn't be my final life, and that if I wanted to have a family, I would probably do better in medicine because there were so many options in medicine, not so much in research. So I went to Dalhousie and married the man that was pursuing me at the time, who was also in medicine. And then in second year, I had my first baby. So I started very early, mothers in medicine. And just 3 weeks before my final exam, that wasn't very smart of me. But I had very supportive classmates, and in most cases, I guess I was the first person in medical school at Dal to have a baby. But I just went ahead and did it. I never asked for permission. I just did it, and it worked out really well. And she's the love of my life. And then I went forward and had 3 more children. So that's how I ended up. And I had to bring my children up rurally. I have to be within 5 minutes of my children. I don't understand commuting. Um, if I'm stressed, I want to go for a walk in the woods or go out in my garden. I think I just have to live a rural life. That's ingrained into me, I think. Well, in my early years, both in med school, there was a quota on women of 10%. So I have 8 brothers. I grew up in a male atmosphere, and I went to med school, and then I went out working. But the most memorable one in my early years of practice is one day I was on call in a small community in the Maritimes, and the ambulance driver, who wasn't a paramedic, but a very generous man who ran the service for the community on his own initiative, called up and said I better be at the hospital and be ready because he had a young male, a teenager, that if he made it to the hospital, it was life and death. And when I got to the hospital and walked around to the ambulance, it was my youngest brother, Peter. And yes, he was on the doors of death. So we immediately went into high gear, got IVs going. My husband arrived. I called a trauma surgeon from the American side who had worked in Vietnam, begged him. He said, I'm on my way. He arrived. They took Peter to the OR. I laid down and gave him 2 units of fresh blood because we had already used our other one. And we spent all evening keeping him alive and flying him by helicopter to Halifax. The next day I was walking up the hill to the hospital and I felt faint. So I laid down in a graveyard and they wanted to ship me off to the hospital, but I said, no, I'm just lacking a little blood. And it taught me at a very early age clinical courage. And, when you're in a really bad situation, do something. Don't stand by and let bad things happen. And it was so personal and so intense that I think it actually prepared me. I probably wouldn't have been able to work in rural and remote communities and have the courage to kind of take it all on if that hadn't happened early and had been successful. Peter is alive still and a lawyer and doing well. And I tease him. I say, "Some of my blood's in you, Pete. You got to be good." So yeah, it was very memorable. The other thing in my early life, as the only female physician, I did a lot of obstetrics and gynecology in women, and therefore, and I joined the Society of Obstetrics and Gynae because that was what was there to do. And I think that's what I am. I'm kind of a pragmatic person. I'm a doer. If there's something that needs to be done, you just do it. And you do the best you can. You work hard at it, and you don't give up. I think of my young life, no. As I say, I was the first person to have a baby in med school. I just did it. When I went out and practiced, I was the only woman in our rural community. I just did it. And there were things to be done that was obvious. You had to just do them. One of the important things that's always been there is I love to learn, I love to read, and therefore the challenges of a rural practice meant that I was very interested in continuing medical education. And I think I brought that to the communities I worked in. And as time went by, I realized that I had to bring that to the region I worked in and eventually to the province and the country. Um, so as I got into my middle age and probably more my senior years, I realized that when I saw something that had to be done, I would just pick up and get it done. And in doing that, I think I led more by example. I think maybe I'm more of a trailblazer. If I see something that should be done, I don't sit there and ask or do a study or, wait for everybody else. I just start it in motion and work hard at it. And eventually it tends to go well. So I think I am at this stage maybe a little more aware of it. Um, I don't, I think your next question is, did I make a conscious choice? No. I think I learned in my big family and dealing with people how to work within a group. They now call it team building. But when you're one of 12 children, you're part of a team. And I also think from a very early age, if something needs to be done, you might as well start doing it and then get the rest on board and work at it collaboratively. It has to kind of work at that. So I think I never made a conscious choice to do that. I think it was just evolved that way. I think there really are challenges, and unfortunately, they're still there today. When I was in med school, as I say, there was a quota on women, and so we were the odd person out. And there was a bit of, not very much. I found among my classmates that it was a great deal of acceptance. I think that was coming because soon after they actually integrated more and more women into medicine. When I went into rural practice, again, there were very few women and more as time went by. So there is definitely always been and probably always will be a certain amount of bias against women, and not just in medicine. And there is the old boys club. Men are like that. I think it helped that I had 8 brothers and grew up playing hockey and with them, and I always was treated with respect and love by them. I have a husband that's a physician. We work well together. Again, great respect and cooperation. And I found most of the people I worked with, it was easy to work with them. I think it's more in academic and in medical politics that you run against real biases and barriers. And I probably, in most cases, have just ignored it, not really wanted to acknowledge it. And just if, as I said, if something needed to be done, like start some rural CPD, just go ahead and start it and get it rolling. I do find that men like to assume the leadership position and take credit sometimes for stuff that they haven't done. I think the other problem that still exists in medicine is that the real levels of leadership, it's very hard for women. The head of every table, the person running the program, is often a male who feels he has the right to run that. A lot of programs I've initiated have later been run by men, and they make twice as much as I ever did. So there's a real problem across not just medicine, but across our society where women are thought that they should be paid less. And I also find that in a lot of things, it's men like to be, as I say, at the head of the table and think they're running the show. And they feel that there's equal representation if the men are all the doctors and then the staff are all the women. And that's terribly wrong. So I think they're still there, and I think we have to kind of push against it. But my way of doing it, as they say, was just to do the work. But there is a survival technique that you have to use when you work. And I always love medicine. I like people. I like being involved. And as I say, if I see something that really should be done, I'll start it and I'll work with people. And I think that's maybe I should have pushed harder. And I'm hoping the young women of today will push harder and maybe push out the old boys club. But men like to lead. It's just what they like to do. And they like to be paid more and given more acknowledgement for it sometimes. And I don't think I need that. I know myself what I want to do and accomplish. So if I'm comfortable with that, I don't have to get an award for it or more money for it. I need to set my own parameters. As I say, at a family table of 12 to 15 people, I learned if you want to be heard, you do lean forward and you speak up. But you say very concisely what you want to say and you make your point. Then you sit back. If you're not heard, you make sure that you are. So you have to do that. And it's even harder if you're a woman. I also found out at an early age that, empty talk, just talking about something, that doesn't accomplish it. You have to do the work. And to get the respect from your younger colleagues, you've got to do the work. And you have to have the validity of having done it. So I think those are ways that you actually change things. Is you see a need, you push against it. They have a whole book on leaning in at the table. Well, I think I leaned in at the table. And I learned that again, growing up, and as, there wasn't that many women in med school, as I say, all the time in my working life, there were more men than women. So I learned that you just have to earn their respect and then be heard. Again, I'm going to say at an early life, by the time I was 12, I could feed 15 people, take care of a garden, take care of babies. I learned a lot of life skills in my early life, and I didn't realize then how important it would be in my professional life. So it wasn't that difficult when I had young children because they were my priority. And even though I worked full time and full service and obstetrics and emergency and on call, I always had backup. I have a wonderful husband who has always backed me up, and I back him up. And we've been married 55 years and have 4 children. My children were my priority, and they're maybe my most valuable accomplishment. And 2 of them are in medicine, married to classmates, women that are in medicine and medical couples. So if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I guess I did a decent job of it all. Anyway, then in my middle life, I think it was a little harder because we trained residents. We had a lot of young doctors. They wanted you for backup, as they say, maybe clinical courage. just that feeling of support and backup. So more and more of our life got absorbed at the hospital and backup for the younger physicians. And although I don't disagree with that, I think it did take over to a degree. And I think that, again, you have to set your priorities. As I said, you go for a walk in the woods, you take a vacation that is totally not medicine, and you get involved in medical education and things that mean something to you. You work a lot. I expected that, and it has been a great life. So I really have no complaints. I just, and your balance of work life is all the time. There's no magic formula, and for each person it's different. I've been really lucky. I've had good luck, good health until I was in my late 60s. I had wonderful children. I had good colleagues to work with, and I love my environment. I like a rural environment. It's beautiful, the mountains. I like having lakes, oceans. I've been lucky that way. And I looked for that, and I was lucky to find it. And as they say, I have a very supportive family and started out that way. So I'm lucky. And part of that balance, as they say, it's a lifelong work in progress. I won't. Sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes it comes a lot more easy. But basically, it's a work in progress. Well, I feel that the most important person that helped me in my professional life was my home support. And as I say, part of that was my husband, but I had a nanny, and my nanny was wonderful. Before that, I always had good housekeepers. My mother said that your children don't care who scrubs the kitchen floor because she worked till 70 as a nurse practitioner. So I always had someone to clean the house. I always, if someone cooked meals, that was wonderful. If not, I cooked them. I did find that was important. I did not stay at the clinic after hours. I went home at 5:30, cooked supper, sat down as a family for our evening meal. Then I knew what my children were doing. I knew what was happening. Even if I was on call, I only left if it was an emergency. And then after supper, I would go back to work. But basically, I think that you set those parameters, and you also know what's important and what you're going to do. But you carry your own weight, but you make sure that it works for you. And in this case, my partner was also my partner in medicine, so I had to make that work, and works for your children. So as I say, that's the most important thing, is that it has to be that balance, and it has to work for you. If I have a regret, it's probably in the middle years. My children kept me very active, and when they were involved in all different kinds of sports and just chasing them around kept me active. But in my middle years, I probably should have been doing more exercise and having more time to myself and more of a personal social life. And that I should have done that. So, but I was so used to kind of my family setting, my balance and my schedule and my priorities, that it was something but the Society of Rural Physicians was it was just beginning. I went to the founding meetings, and I found people that understood what my life was about. So that was an important group. And then I led the BC contingency and got involved with the continuing education and the conferences. And it was important to belong to a group that understood my reality. So, and again, that was rural medicine, motherhood, marriage, all the things. And I wrote an article once on M&Ms for Mary, and that is exactly it. It was all those things meshed together that worked for me, but it was nice to know other people were doing the same thing. Don't know urban medicine even in my senior years. after 55, I started doing locums in more rural and remote areas. Sometimes you're the only doctor there, as I say. So in your early years, I'd say do whatever you can to, get experience, and do have a good support at home. If you do want a family, I give a whole course and led at UBC and in BC. Mothers in Medicine even gave the talk at the SRPC conferences, because I think sometimes women get so involved in medicine and work that they forget that if they want to have children, they have to fit it in their younger life. So at the beginning of a career, and for many women that's already in their 30s, then if they want a family, they have to have a family then. So I talk about that. It's not that that is the only way. It's the way I know, and therefore I understand that part. But I've also known women that have missed out on having a family because they worked too hard, and just the opportunity was lost. So I think in your young life you have that choice, and it's got to be maybe a little more conscious choice, that you choose to have a family and to mesh it with rural medicine. I found it much easier to bring up particularly small children in a rural community, and my two daughter-in-laws, who are rural physicians, are finding the same thing. For younger children, it is much easier in a rural community where you're 5 minutes away from your children at all times and you're readily available. You're not wasting an hour commuting, and you're very much part of the community. You know their friends. You know where they're going at all times. So that would be my young life. In middle life, I think you have teenagers, you have children going to university, or maybe you have no children. But it maybe is a time where you have to focus a little more on exercise and taking care of yourself and developing a life with medicine, but that is also rewarding. And mine was medical education. Other people will pick other things. Other things that I love to do is read, knit, music. These are all things that you can do in a rural and remote community. And garden. I think the one actually has to build up for your middle life some interests that kind of keep you going. And you have to know by your middle life what your balance is and what parts of medicine you want to spend more time on. In your senior life, I think that's even more important. You have to pace yourself and you have to prioritize what's really important to you. And mine, again, was medical education and staying involved with teaching residents and students and just encouraging rural medicine and enabling it. And, just acknowledging that the people that were doing it were doing something very worthwhile and good. The first 5 years I was in medicine, through no fault of my own. My father died and we inherited a practice. Well, there were 4 doctors and 20,000 people, so it was hugely underserviced. I did an awful lot of obstetrics, gynecology. I even got investigated for finding too many cancers of the cervix as the only woman there and the first one to do a lot of pap tests. So, and the other one I would do in my professional life, as they say, I think a lot of young women feel that I should have pushed back a little bit against the biases against women and the old boys club, and I probably should have, but I didn't have it in me at the time. I got leukemia when I was 68 and had to do chemo. That kind of set me back and couldn't do frontline medicine. Made me realize that I had been very fortunate to deal with a lot of really wonderful people, both as patients and as colleagues. And I think that's in your later years. I think you just have to be appreciative of how lucky you've been and how good life has been for you. Well, the thing I'm most proud of is I have 4 wonderful children. They're caring, competent adults. They're all own their own home. They have families. I have 10 grandchildren, and they're wonderful. They're my inspiration at this point, and they give me joy. So that is my biggest accomplishment. Meshing medicine and motherhood and marriage is my biggest accomplishment. Meshing motherhood, marriage, and medicine together is also probably my biggest clinical accomplishment. And for that, I was lucky. As I said, I had good health, good support, um, and an early education that really helped me with that. In medicine, definitely doing full service for 44 years, going to the rural, remote communities, often the indigenous reserves, learning more about their cultures. I found that all very interesting, but very affirmative too, in that I don't think, as I said, it's no good to talk about things. You have to get involved and experience them. And I've really been lucky that way. I've experienced a lot. And being in medicine is they use the word holistic, but you're very involved at people at important times of their life, birth, death, being very sick, and being able to really work with people. And many rural doctors are phenomenal humanitarians, and I think, not acknowledged enough by our system. I think the challenges you face are medical politics and the academic, and yet we have to stay integrated with them as well. And I found that a real challenge. If I was going to do anything more, I guess that would be it. I would push back and make it maybe a little more acknowledgement of the true workers in medicine. And I think that's one of the problems right now with family medicine. I've always said it's not very family focused. One of the important things I did in rural continuing education was to put childcare in there. Mainly, my husband and I are both doctors. And when we had to take our children to conferences, not only was it hugely difficult and distracting, but it was also hugely expensive. So when we started our rural conferences right from the very beginning in 1998, we put childcare in. And that was always an important part. So we put it in at the provincial level and at the national level. And I'm proud of that because today a lot more young women have children. Doctors are married to doctors because they go to medical school together, like my sons. And for them, childcare at a conference is a major part. And family medicine should be more family focused. And I always said, big clinics and hospitals, even rural ones, should have childcare as part of their program. And by ignoring that, they have troubled and discouraged many young physicians that just found they couldn't leave their young children at home and go to the hospital and work. And they shouldn't have been asked to do that. And maybe, that was one thing I should have pushed more for. I used to push a little for it, and I put it in where I could, and I fought against it when it was stuck in my face, but I probably should have done more to integrate family and medicine, particularly in a rural setting, and particularly family practice. And I think the academic centers and medical politics have not paid enough attention to physicians balancing their life with a family. It's not fair to ask male or female doctors to give up life, a family, the things that are important to people, just to practice medicine. So we need to have a more open view on that. And of course, everyone's different, and how they're going to mesh it and balance it is different for them. I think that's the other part of it, is having a little more openness, less talk and more doing. I think that's one of my major things that is still there. I should have done more for that. And I'm still trying to be involved in a little bit. As I say, I have my two youngest boys are rural physicians, married to rural physicians, and those are my grandchildren. So I stay involved in whatever way I can, just because I think that is important, and that's where healthcare has to go. We have to take care of our families and our communities. And in order to do that, my mom used to say is you can't take care of other people if you don't take care of yourself and your family. So I think that is an important lesson that I hope the College of Family Practice learns it pretty soon. Um, and, a lot of little ways that they work against it in medicine, it's insidious. Um, Doctors are often highly educated and intelligent people, but when they actually work against the family and women, they do it in very subtle ways. And I think that's the hard part of it. Well, I would like to acknowledge, as I said earlier, the SRPC right from the very beginning, and I was there at the beginning, has been an important, encouraging, acknowledging factor in rural medicine, and has really, our original goal was the sustainability, and that was in the 1990s. And they made a huge impact on me, my community, my province, and Canada. And it was through a lot of hard work and some really good people. And as I say, being involved in medical education was not only working, but there was a lot of feedback in that and a lot of reward. I learned an awful lot and found it fascinating to just be involved in it. And the scariest part in my early years was standing up in front of a huge room full of doctors and actually being heard and saying things. I got a little more used to it as time went by. But in medicine, we're so used to one-on-one and small groups and working in a group. But, a whole big classroom and being in front of it, I found. But it also taught me that a lot of rural doctors are more comfortable learning in small group sessions, hands-on sessions, doing something. So I think I contributed that to rural medical education. And as they say, the SRPC was very important. I'm also in faculty at UBC, and the reason they put me there is because I'm a rural doctor. I'm a female when females weren't common there, and I'm also have written papers and have a master's and things that they wanted. But I actually think that we do have to keep our integration with the College of Family Practice and the universities, but they're the hardest ones, especially as a rural physician, because when your children are young, you can't leave them. You can work very hard in your community, and that's everything. And it's in your middle ages as your children grow up that you need to feed back. And I continue to do that, but my energy is limited. My age is limiting. But like I was doing the interviews for the rural program in BC, and I'm really proud of my contribution to that. And it might not be right up there, but I did work hard for that. I really found that was very rewarding. And when I was doing the interviews, I realized there's a lot of really great young people out there that still want to go into rural medicine. And we've helped to build it as a place where more want to work. And if they're out there and they're working or they do part of their training in rural medicine, then I think they'll find out that a rural life is very rewarding. I mean, where else can you step outside your door and walk in the woods, listen to the birds, get away from all the worries of the world? And where else can you go out? You can bike, you can hike, you can ski, you can skate, you can swim on your doorstep. I mean, it's phenomenal. And your children are right there. Right now, my grandchildren can walk from school to my place, and I can feed them muffins and milk after school. So rural living is a phenomenal way, and we don't treasure it enough in Canada. We've emphasized our urban centers. Our universities are in urban centers, and we need to realize that our rural roots are very important to our Canadian culture, not just to medicine, but to the whole culture of being independent, resourceful, Having clinical courage is more of a rural thing.